everybody. Thank you very much for joining us here today. This is Paul Taubman with 9.connects. You are in the right place today if you are here for our webinar on Altium Designer's multi-board design project, something that they added in Altium Designer 18. So we're going to go through that new project along with the editors and give you kind of a walkthrough of what it's all about. What I wanted to show you over here is basically two different versions of the board. So this is the actual board itself. So we have actually created this board that we're going to demonstrate today. This is called the rangefinder board. And this is a picture of the one I did during my practice sessions in preparation for this particular webinar. So you can see that this is something you can draw in Altium Designer now. Just to let you know, just so as we're going along over here, this consists of basically 3 boards. The first one is the mega board here on the bottom. So that's an Arduino board that we use to develop. That's our platform. On top here, in the middle one, we have the rangefinder board. And then lastly, we also have our LED display here as well. So during this presentation here today, we're going to take a look at this from not only a schematic perspective, but we're going to also look at this from a 3D perspective as well. But before we do that, I do have a polling question for you. I'd kind of like to get a little more information about whether or not you've played with the multi-board design. So we're going to get that polling question up here right now. So hopefully you saw that here. If not, I'll just read it off to you. 41% of you guys have just not even installed Altium Designer yet. 49, or about 50% of you, have used Altium Designer 18 but have not ventured into this. And the remaining, there's a very small percentage of you here who've actually played with it, or in the smallest percent, 4%, now actually making use of it. So thank you very much for providing that information. All right, the good news is that's all you're going to see in terms of slide decks here today. We're going to actually jump now into Altium Designer. So here's Altium Designer 2018. I decided to kind of just show you the rendering of this board over here. And I also wanted to just show you something other than just a big charcoal gray screen here with something in it before we get started. But there it is over there. And I figured I'd give you guys kind of a little tidbit too. A lot of people don't know about this. When we worked in support, we used to get a lot of files. When I used to work at Altium in support, we get a lot of files from customers, and we would have a ton of files that were opened over here. And we finally, or I at least found a way to clear this thing rather quickly. If you've got a lot of stuff open, you just want to start with a clean slate. And I was going to show that to you here right now. So it's a little added tip for you here today. If you go into File and you go into New, and at the very bottom, you'll see something that says Design Workspace. If you click on that, and it may prompt you to save, but I don't save it. It basically clears everything for you. It'll ask you if there's anything that needs to be saved, and you can say yes or no, and then at points it closes up. So here's our screen over here with nothing in it. So let's get started with this, and let's start going through the process of a multi-board project. So first and foremost, we're going to go to File, New, Project. So you can see that over here, and we're going to go into multi-board project. So one of the things to note about, especially for those who haven't really played with Altium Designer 18, they removed all the FPGA stuff. So all the FPGA and the embedded stuff is no longer in Altium Designer 18. So that's why the number of projects here looks a little bit thinner than what you may have seen in other projects. But we're going to start with a multi-board design project. And just like any other project, that's what you get over here. You get basically a PrjMbd, and in this case, MBD, which stands for multi-board design. So pretty much any of the extensions are going to have the letter M in it. Okay. So we've got that over here. Now within the project, there's actually 2 different editor types. So let's take a look at those. The first one we're going to look at is the multi-board schematic. So under File, New, then there's multi-board schematic, and there's schematic. So you don't want to select schematic. In fact, I'm kind of surprised that they allow us to do that because really what we want to work with here is a multi-board schematic design. So we're going to bring that in here. And so it does bring it in. I've noticed it kind of zooms it out, but that's not a problem. The zooming features that you're used to and all the other editors work here as well. I'm going to hit the letter V for View and D for Document, and that'll bring us here to the screen. And you know that you're in a schematic document for multi-board when you see this kind of orangish grid background that they've used, the yellow orangey type of grid background. So that's the grid background they picked, and it makes it very obvious that you're in a multi-board schematic. Okay, so we've got that over here. Now what do we do with this thing? Well, we're basically going to use this to show how we want to connect between 2 different boards. And what I'm going to do here first is I'm going to click on Place just so that you can see what kind of primitives they are bringing along here with this. So 2 of the primitives are basically module and entry, and that's what you're going to see here as I demonstrate it. They are the 2 I'll call electrical primitives. Those are the ones that show connectivity between the 2 boards. they look and act a lot like your typical schematic symbol in your typical schematic sheet entry. I think you'll see that as we're going along here. After that, we also have the different ways of doing connectivity. And I'll talk a little bit more about each one of them because each one of them has some caveats to it depending on which one that you select. And then lastly, there are the typical non-electrical items that you can add here to help embellish your presentation here, your schematic. So that's what we're going to start with. I'm going to go into Place Module. So we'll start over there. And I'm going to zoom on in here. So let's do that right now. So I'm going to drop 2 of these modules in there. So here's the first module, and we'll drop in the second module here. Okay. Now that I've got these, I'm going to hit the Escape key because it will allow me to keep drawing modules until I'm done. These modules need to have a reference to a project, and that's what I'm going to do here right now. So I'm going to click on the first one, and I'm going to put some information in there. So the first one, it asks for a designator. Now, when I was practicing this in the past, I was using like U1 and U2. And I don't recommend that because later on, if we are in the connection manager or in a bill of materials or even in the ECO changes, all these things I'll show later on, it makes it kind of hard to determine which one's which, especially if you've got a lot of things out there. So what I like to do is call it by the actual board name itself. So this one's going to be called Mega. So I'm going to change the designator over here to Mega. And by the way, it will change in real time. And for those who are somewhat new to Altium Designer 18, the old days of double-clicking and then bringing up the dialog the properties as a dialog have been removed in Altium Designer 18. Altium has decided to kind of go along the lines of what SolidWorks does in a couple of other projects, where when you click on it, it now becomes an active panel. So you kind of see that going on over here. So if I click off of it for a moment, it shows me all of the properties for the document. If I click on the Mega board over here, it shows me the properties for this module, and so on and so forth. So it's taken a little bit of getting used to, especially where things are located, but over time it's kind of starting to sink in, at least in my case here. So I've got the Mega board, I've got the name and the title, and that's fine, but I've got to associate a project to it. So the way I am going to do that here is I'm going to go to Source, and by the way, you'll see that there's Local and Managed up here. I am not using a vault, I'm doing a local, so I'm going to leave it as local. And I click on the 3 dots. Now watch what happens when I do this. It's not going to be happy with me because I got to save this off, and that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to right-click on the MBS. So that's Multiboard Schematic Doc, and we're going to do a File Save As. And I have saved this here, so we don't have to go fishing through my directory system. It is right over here. So we'll save this as such, and we will call this Rangefinder. MBD, just so that it has a different name from everything else. And I'll copy this one here because in typical Altium fashion, usually when you save off the schematic, it also wants you to save off the project as well. And so it works very similar to the way you'd expect it to work in a PCB project. So when I save this, it's going to prompt me immediately saying, well, that's great. Now tell me where you want to save the project. So again, I'm just going to click into here. And one other thing too, by the way, is when you put in a name here, you don't have to actually write in the extension. Altium will put the proper extension in there for you, so it saves a little bit of time. So I'm going to press Save here, and now everything here in my project panel has been saved off, and that's perfectly fine. So I can now click on these 3 dots again here. Again, I'm going to go over to where my rangefinder is, and I'm going to bring in the Mega board. You'll notice that these are out unrouted, and there's something I'll show you a little bit later on that you can do in the other editor, and I wanted to make sure they were unrouted so I could show that to you. So I'm going to go into Mega here, and you can see the PRJ PCB. That is what I want to associate to this project. So that's what it's doing here right now. And as a matter of fact, you can see indented underneath, I can see the project, and I can open these up and take a look at them as I'm going along. I'm going to do the same thing here for the rangefinder. So my designator on this, I will call rangefinder. I was going to call it RF, but I think that would be a misnomer there. So we'll do designator and title. Same thing with local. By the way, notice with the source, okay, with the source here, we have, it allows me to actually put down the same board over and over again. And as a matter of fact, if you look at Altium's flagship example, they do this whole motherboard with this Wi-Fi card and the 2 SIM cards that you can play with. What I wanted to mention there is that you can, in that example, you can actually see that they use the same project twice. And so you can create a project where you've got multiples of the same board just coming off of the same project. So that's perfectly a viable way to work. But in this case here, I'm going to click on the three dots. I'm going to go up a directory here, and I'm going to associate this to the rangefinder project. So we've got that all set up and ready to go. Okay. So what do we do with this other than save it? We want to show our connectivity between the Mega and the rangefinder. Okay. So how are we going to do that? Well, we can certainly do a place entry, but this is kind of a very painful way of doing it. It's a lot like, for example, when you do a sheet symbol and you have a sheet entry there. You can do those individually, but this would be kind of a lot of work to be done. So what they've done over here is they've given us some ability to port stuff in automatically. So I'm going to go here to design, and you'll notice that we can import child projects or information from our projects or PRJ PCBs into the multiboard. And by the way, we can also push stuff back in, and I'll show you an example of that a little bit later on. So we're going to import here, and I'm going to click on this. Okay. And now right now it's going through both of those projects and determining which one of my connectors are viable candidates to be brought over. And I'll show you how you can do that in the projects here in just a moment. So we get your typical ECO here, and I know that they ordered this based off of the connector name as opposed to the project name itself. But again, this is why you want to give these good names rather than U1 or U2, because I can tell very quickly which connector these had come in from. I'm going to click the execute changes, and boom, that's done. And now you can see all of these connectors. So remember, these are connectors, and each one of these things could represent a 1-pin connector. It could represent a 500-pin connector, but it represents that connector that is on your project. Now, how did it know that these were the ones that I wanted to use? Well, there's one little setup that you have to do in your project in order to make this work. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Arduino board. It's the main board for the Arduino and the Mega board. That's the Arduino Mega board. And by the way, as a side note, Arduino is pretty cool because what they'll do is they actually post all of their schematics and their works on their website. So if you want to download them, you certainly can. The only catch is that they were done in Eagle, so you have to do some importing. That's what we did over here for this one. Okay, but any one of these connectors that belong on there, what I did prior to this, just to save a little bit of time, was I basically went into each one of these headers. And if we go over to parameters, you will see that I added in the following variable. It is, the name of it is system, and the value is connector. So in order for this communication connector to be seen by the multi-port design, I have to have this parameter buried somewhere in the list. Even if I had other things here, I still have to have at least one parameter. It says system equals connector. And that's true pretty much for any one of these. I did it for all of them, even though we're not using them all, just so that you could see this example of that over here. So that by having that in there, we were able to get what we just saw here, where all this information gets ported in. And all of the information does get ported in. So even if I click, let's say, on this PWML, and we bring up its properties, when I expand it out, I can see, right now it's no mated, but I can see all of the pins here along with the net names with it. Okay. So there you go. We can see that over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of a variation. You can see you can grab that here. I'm going to do a Control-C. And I'm going to pull this over. You'll see why I'm going to pull this over here in a moment. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the different types of connectivity. Now, granted, most of the ones I'm going to show you aren't real, but I figured for this particular instance, it just gives you a flavor as to how these things do actually kind of connect up here. So what I'm going to do here for this one is, I mean, at least I'll try to connect these up as realistically as they can. And here's, by the way, just a good tip. You probably want to make sure that the labels that you have over here are match over here. Now, how does that work? Well, it really has to be done in the PCB projects themselves. So that's just kind of a note here. Unfortunately, at this point, I've not been able to find a way in Altium to say, you know what, this JP6 over here actually matches up with JP1 over here, and I want to change JP1 on mine to match up with the Arduino board. I would actually have to go into the PCB project and make that change. I can't push that particular change back. But keep in mind also, in all fairness to Altium, the fact that they were able to put together a brand new project with 2 new editors and its capabilities it has, and generally work really well for a Rev 1, is pretty remarkable. So my kudos to them on that. So there'll be little things that they'll probably allow, but right now I can't. So the best thing to do is make sure that your connector names are matching up in your projects, and it will make it a lot easier for you to hook these things up. I'm actually going off a side piece of paper here that I wrote up before the webinar so I can move this along. But again, for our purposes, I'm not so much interested in connecting this up as to show you what happens when you connect different things up. So in this case over here, if we do want to show our connectivity, we go into the place menu, and there is 4 different types of connections. Now, for our particular example, everything that we did was a direct connect. So in theory, if I want to set this up properly and show this to you, I would line all of these things up, and I would just do direct connect. But that would be kind of boring. Again, I want to show you some of the other features. But let's go in here and say place, direct connect, and see what happens over here. And then the other one, well, first and foremost, you notice that you get a lot of verbiage here. Okay, so you get their names here, and they give a name for each one of the connectors. Plus, they also give a name for the actual connection itself. And when you click here, you can see these are connections. Again, these are direct connects, so they're expecting pretty much that the pin 1 is going to match up with pin 1, pin 2 is going to match up with pin 2, and so on and so forth. The other one is the wire, and what they mean by the wire is that you are actually going to solder wires from one to the other. So it's kind of like a direct connect, but you're actually using wire to represent this. And this one's a little bit off, but that's fine. We'll click here and put this here, and again, you can see it. Now, once you've got these wires or these direct connects together, because you're not calling out a connector that's separate, right? You just call out either wires or a direct connect. You will see those immediately in what's called the Design Connection Manager. And the Design Connection Manager allows you to do a couple of things here. First and foremost, if you're not happy with the pin names and you want to get them all uniform with each other, you can do that over here. Now, there's one thing I'll note here is that if one of them, for example, has a no net, you can't force this one to a ground and then push it over because it was never set up in the schematic to do that. But if there's already a net name that's there, let's see, here's a really great example. Here's one in the Mega that's called PB5. In the rangefinder, it's called ground. Well, I don't want it to be called PB5/ground. I want this to actually be called ground. So if I click over here, so these are just the general names, and I hit return, what you're going to notice over here is that for the Mega board, it gives me the option to rename this to ground, whereas because I already called the net name ground, it's not giving me that option to change it here on the rangefinder. If I call this something very different, like a ground VCC, then it would probably give me the option to change both of those. But I'm going to just click on rename here, so we can do that, and you can see this has now been changed. So all 3 of these have now been changed. I'm going to click on apply here. All that apply does is just applies it to my to this whole Mega multi-board project. It has nothing to do with my project itself until I do an ECO. So if I go over to design and I'm going to do update child projects, okay, so I'll click on this over here, I can actually execute the change, and wherever the net label was for PB5, it will change it to ground. Now, just a caution for those who are already doing these type of things, I did find a situation where it doesn't change all of them, and I have reported that to Altium, but just be aware that yes, you can push it through, but make sure that the other names, like anything else that was labeled PB5, also got changed as well. So that's just a little heads up for you. But nevertheless, it's a really cool feature to kind of get all the naming conventions aligned with each other. So in summary, I can change the net names. Okay, so as long as there was a net on both sides, I can change the net names to make them uniform. I just can't do it to the component designators just yet. And again, I'm pretty sure Altium will address that soon enough. So let's press close over here. Oh, I'm sorry, there's one other thing I was going to bring here. Let me go back to the connection manager. So what you can see over here is this is titled direct, and you'll see that this is titled wire. So as long as I use a direct or wire, and I just simply show that connectivity, it's going to just basically list that over here. Now, what about the other two, like cable and harness? The cable is basically like a harness, but it's saying, look, it's a one-to-one contact, where the harness actually allows me to show multiple connectivity with each other. So let me just show the cable here really quick. So if I have, let's escape this one out. You'll see what I'm doing here in just a moment. I'm just going to pull this one here. So I'm going to draw this one as a cable, and we'll do a place, and we'll do a cable, and we'll draw that one in over here. Okay. And then the other one I'll draw in is as a harness. So again, I know this is not realistic to the design, but just want to show you this this capability here. And I'm going to go into this, and I'm going to say, all right, here's a harness. The big difference is that in a harness design, I can split it off, whereas I can't do that with the cable. Okay. So click on that, and I can do that over here. And when you get into either the cable or the harnesses, especially the harness, it's going to want to know how you want this connected. So they're going to say, hey, look, you've got this thing called H11. Who's it going to be connected to, and vice versa. And you can have a little drop down. It's going to say, okay, how do you want these things connected? However, in terms of actually setting up your signals and seeing it here in the connection manager, there's a step that we also have to do here as well. So right now you see that neither the cable nor the harness is being listed here. The reason why is because with a cable or harness, you actually have to call out the connector that you want to use. So for us to do that, for example, let me click on the harness here. You can see that it's looking for 3 different cables. Now, the way to do that is when we click on the 3 little dots over here, it can navigate you to your library. So to kind of cheat a little bit here, I'm just going to use the 8-pin headers out of the miscellaneous connectors just because, as I said, this is just kind of an example to show, and that we really wouldn't have done this anyways. So here's header 8, and I will click on that, and I'll press OK. And let's take another header here. The only thing is it doesn't keep me where my library was in the past, but that's all right. We'll find it here. Let's say that this one this time is going to be header 10. Okay, and I'll click on this one and press OK. And I need to add one more. So once I've got these in place, it gives me a lot more flexibility to do things with it here. So just add this one more in here. Okay, and this one we'll call header. Actually, we'll call it header 8 again, because most of these are 8 headers. So we'll click on this one. We'll press OK. And there we go. So now that we have these in here, it actually allows us to do a little bit of work in here, actually not in this one now, but it should allow us to do the work here in Design Connection Manager. So again, we won't see the cable in here because I haven't given it what it needs. Direct connect wire, and we should see the cable in there. Let's click on this, make sure we got it all. So it's all in there, and so those headers are in there, and our group is there. Let's make sure that these make sense. So those, let's put this one here, to, mega, and then we want the other one. So we'll say, pick on that one. There we go. That's the mega H. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got it flipped. Normally I did it the other way. That's why we're seeing 2 different ones. All right, we'll call this one the X2, and this both over here will be on the rangefinder and the rangefinder again. So, really? All right, do it that way. There we go. Now we got all of our pins because we have our stuff set up over here. And it does allow us, if we want to, we can change those nets. But again, I think it's a little bit easier. Now that we've got that set up here, we can go into our Design Connection Manager, and we should now see that in there. There we go. There's our harness, and we can do a little more manipulation in there now that we've got those connector heads set up. So that's what they've got set here. By the way, the whole idea behind this is that once you've got this, you can copy this to a clipboard and bring this over to an Excel spreadsheet, which is what a lot of people usually need for their, if they're trying to figure out how we're going to do the connections from point to point, especially if you're going to do either a harness or a cable. So there's how we would work that over here. So what I want to do is just ask you a question, because that's pretty much the feature capability of this, is to pass along the net names to each other, show the connectivity to each other. We definitely need this also for the assembly drawing, which I'll show you here in a couple of moments. But I'd like to open this to another polling question. And the polling question here is just like to know if you found this useful. Okay, we'll close this here in just a moment. All right. So it looks like 30% of you would use this in your workflow, and 65% of you would definitely use it if you needed to use it, and a small percentage of you said no, you didn't really find this useful, and that's okay. I think it's good to, it's really kind of interesting. I actually thought the numbers would be a little bit different, but I'm actually very surprised at them, and that's great. So, all right, there we go with this here. And again, if you have questions that I haven't really covered, feel free to write those into the questions panel. In the panel that comes with you in the GoToWebinar, and at the end I'll be more than happy to answer some of those questions. I should have made that announcement a little bit earlier, but I got tripped up with the polling question and wanted to dive right into it there. So if you do have questions, feel free to write those in, and I will have time to answer some questions a little bit later on. All right, let's get on to the other editor. So we're now going to go into File, New, and then we're going to do Multiboard Assembly. By the way, as a side note, notice that there is not another multi-board schematic they make available here. So in a multi-board project, they only allow you one schematic. And that kind of makes sense, because if you think about it, there was no primitive that would allow us to go off sheet to the next one. So just be aware of that. All right, let's get on to the multi-board assembly. All right, so the multi-board assembly, the easiest way to think about this is that you are basically working in the 3D mode of like a PCB project. There's no 2 key to hit, there's no 1 key to go into the board shape mode, none of that whatsoever. You're just working in a 3D environment. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to pull in the 2 boards, the Mega board, and we're also going to pull in the rangefinder board, and afterward I'll pull in a couple of the step files here so you can see how these all play together. Let me do a save on this first because it's going to ask me to do that anyway. So let's do a right click here. We'll do a save as. It should save us where we want it to be. And we'll call this one rangefinder again. It's still in my, there it is, it's still in my copy buffer. And we'll save that off. And actually just as a good practice here, I'm just going to do a save all and we should be good to go. So let's go back over to this. And by the way, the extension for the assembly is MBA, Multiboard Assembly Document. Now let's bring it on in. So it's kind of like an ECO process. I can go over here and click on design and I can import the changes. So we'll click on that here. These are the 2 projects I'm going to bring in and I'm going to execute the changes. Okay, now that these have been brought in, you can see these here on the screen. Now we can play with these and manipulate them and see what we can do with them, and we can check for collisions and a couple of other features that they've got as well. What's also really cool about this is that if you are doing multi-board design, and one of the things that a lot of us do a practice of, and I still think it's an important practice if you're working with a mechanical engineer, but if you've got the boards already and you're just trying to make sure that the placements are correct, you can also do that as well. So if you found, for examples, like you looked at this Mega board and you said, you know what, that main chip over here, I've got to move it. And that's why I took all the routes here, because usually this is during the placement situation. I can actually go into this and move it about. So I'm going to click on this, right click on it, and I'm going to say edit selected part. So this whole thing is considered the edit part, selected part. And once it does that, okay, I can move things around. So I can grab this over here, and I'll talk, by the way, about this gizmo here in a moment. The cool part about it is that I'll show more detail definitely as we're going along. If you want to freehand it, you just grab anywhere you want. I'll do a Control Z here. That won't work. Yeah, there we go. But if I grab the green arrow here, it'll move me up and down, even if my cursor is moving left and right here. So I can grab it either way. But let's say, for instance, I really want to move this capacitor way up here, and I want to move this one over here. And there was a fiducial underneath there anyway, so I can't move it. But nevertheless, let's say that these I want to move about, and I'm happy with this and say, yeah, this is great. So what I can do now is I can say finish part editing, and this will actually push it over to the Arduino Mega PCB board. So I'm going to press this as OK. Okay. And then if once I'm out of there, you can see it still retains it. But if I go here to the Arduino Mega board and bring it up, you're going to see that this thing is also in the same, when I say this, I'm talking about the chip is in the same location, and that this one's been moved here. Now, can I go in there and say, no, that was really a bad idea, I want to move these around again? I can certainly do that. So if I click on this and I move this here, and let's take this other one and just bring it back over here, for example, I can save this. All right, go back into the MBS doc, right? My MBA doc over here. You'll notice that there wasn't an instant change, and interestingly enough, it doesn't show as an ECO. But if I right click on it and I say edit selected parts, it will update it at that point in time. And you can see that these have now been moved based on what I did in the PCB doc. So there's definitely a communication that is going between the 2 documents, and that's perfectly fine. I'm going to right click here and I'm going to say finish part editing, and we should be good to go. Now, the bigger question is probably on your mind is how do we navigate this thing? How do we get everything stacked up? So let's take a look at that. So they've added these things in here called the Gizmos. So this one is pretty much I'll call it the viewer gizmo. And if you click on something, you'll also see, especially this one here, you'll see here that this one has a what they call a component gizmo. And you can certainly do a freehand on any of these things. So if you click on this, you can just click anywhere you want, and you can move it wherever you so see fit. However, these gizmos help you to, again, guide you in very specific directions, and it makes it really kind of easy to get things aligned up as well. And I'll show you 2 other tools that they have to also assist in this. But generally speaking, through the gizmo, you can get a lot of work done once you get a feel for it. Now, the viewing one here is just that. It is just a viewing. And if you click on the different sides over here, it will show it to you in different ways. Okay, so if I click on the red one, it shows me that. And if you click on the same one again, it will flip it to the other side. So if I click here and I click it again, it shows it on the other side. If I click the green one, The green one's the one I wish to have the most. Unfortunately, it always puts it in a 90 degree that I don't necessarily use. I'll show you another way to do that in a moment. And then I'm going to go back to my blue. So the good old-fashioned ball that we use in all the other 3D tools, like in PCB library and in the PCB itself, you hold down the shift key and you right mouse click, it still works here. They just don't show the ball for it. So I am holding down my shift key, I am right mouse clicking, and I do that. And a lot of times when I'm manipulating, that's how I still do things here. So I still got all that muscle memory from the other 3D tools. But nevertheless, the gizmos that they provide do certainly help, as you'll see here in a little bit. All right, so what do I need to do? Well, I want to get this board stacked on top of here, and yeah, I can use the gizmos to kind of move things around, but I'm going to show you two other tools to do this as well. So I'm going to kind of bring this one over here as such. So the two tools that they provide under the tools menu, the first one is plane to plane, and the second one's axis to axis, and I will show both of them. The first one I'm going to do is align plane to plane. So I am going to click on this, all right? The first thing I have got to do is I have to select the first plane that's not going to move. Okay, because whatever gets selected for, second is the one that's going to move here. So this is one I don't want to have move on me here. So I am going to select this very top here, okay? And I've learned the hard way to not select the pins because the pins have different angles and then the board gets off a little bit on an angle there. I'll talk about rotations here in just a moment. But I'm going to click over here on this, and you'll see now that this actually has been brought, the bottom of this board has now actually been brought to the same level as this. So if I escape out, because it will allow me to continue with that command, I select this. I'm going to zoom it just a little bit by scrolling it back here. And I'm going to hit the green arrow. I know it's not easy to see, but there is the green arrow here. I'm going to bring this one forward. And then, of course, I'm going to do a shift right mouse click again so you can see that. And I'm also going to bring this up a little bit because actually this thing, unless you take a hammer to it, you're really never going to get these things to pressure fit all the way in there anyways. So there it is, and now it's just really a matter of finessing it into place by using the various various arrows on this gizmo here. So this actually is a very realistic rendition of this particular board. It's going to stick up a little bit again because we can't push all those pins all the way down. And so with a little bit of finesse and a little bit of work, and trust me, the first time I did it, it took me quite a while to kind of get used to that. But once you kind of get used to the gizmo, you can manipulate things rather quickly in this particular tool. The other thing that you can do is you can bring in step files. So let's take a look at that. By the way, as a side note, they do have a panel called the Multiboard Assembly. So I'm going to click on that here. All it does is just simply list the type of things that are currently in your assembly. Now, there are three things you can bring in. You can bring in just a PCB dock. You can bring in another multi-board design project. So if you've got multiple multi-board design projects, apparently you can bring them in. I have not tried that yet, but they do allow for that. And then they also allow you to bring in a step file as well. So you can use these three buttons up here. Sometimes I forget which one's which, so I can still go to the file menu and I can bring them in through the file menu itself. So I'm going to click on Insert Step Part. So let's bring that one on in. Okay, and I'm going to first start off with the standoff. They do not allow me to do a multiple bring in of the step files. I can only bring in one at a time, but that's fine. So we're going to do with that here. I'm going to press open. So there is my standoff. I'm not going to move it because I want to show you guys one thing because it tripped me up pretty good, and I figured it's kind of a good little tip to remember. If I got to bring in another one, I'm going to go back here, insert a step part in, and I'm also going to click on this here again. I'm going to press open. Now, it looks like nothing happened, but believe it or not, they're actually stacked on top of each other. So I'm going to click on one of them here, and I'm going to bring it here, and I'm going to click on the other one and bring it here as well. And then I'll also show you the rotation. So the rotation feature is actually pretty cool. And let me pull us around so we get a better view of it. So by pulling on any one of these arrows, or pardon me, these arches, then it will allow me to do a rotation of it. And what's neat is that at every 90 degrees, it kind of locks you in. So it's not like, well, am I at 91 degrees or am I at 89 degrees? No, it will lock you in at 90 once you get there. So if I click on this red one, so I'm going to click and hold on it. And now I bring it up. And I don't know if you kind of notice it, but it just kind of pushes it right into place and boom, it's done. So I'm going to leave that there for a moment. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one here. Okay. And there it is. And so both of those are now pushed in. And again, I can use my gizmo to kind of get these a little bit closer to our board over here. There we go. All right. So the other tool I was going to show you is axis to axis. All right. And I'll bring you a little closer in. And again, if I just click on the and not do anything with the gizmo, it gives me kind of a free form on the XY axis. But let me show you now the tools, axis to axis. So let's bring that one in. Okay, so again, I got to give it a point of reference. And this is when, if you have something with a hole, it works really well. And not a square hole, but a regular hole. So I'm going to click over here for my first axis point. I'm going to click here for my second axis point. And that one actually came on dead on, which doesn't always happen. Usually I've got to do an adjustment afterwards. We'll see if this one comes on dead on. I'm going to hold down my shift key, right mouse click, so I can bend this just a little bit. I'm going to click here for the first one, and I'm going to click here for the second one. Wow, these things really came in pretty good. Normally I've got to move them. Sometimes they're underneath, sometimes they're way on top, but that's not a problem. I'm going to hit the escape key to jump out of this, and now I'm going to just move this one down a bit here. Okay, so there they are. The last one I'm going to show, I could spend quite a bit of time showing you how to bring in all of these things, but just to have something that's a little bit complete, I am going to bring in the LED board. And just for time's sakes, I could also bring in the interconnect that we used on the other side of that LED board along with the sensor. We can always make those files available to you if you actually want to see those. But nevertheless, let me bring this one in here just to show it one more time. And that's what I'm talking about is the LED. So let's go to step part. So the LED color module, let's bring that in. Okay. So again, we have something that needs some rotation. So I'm going to click on the red one and bring it down. It did lock into place. That's great. And I'll just, again, use my gizmo to kind of get me where I need to go here a little bit. Okay. Actually, I'm off that. That one was a little bit freehand. So let's click on that and make sure I'm on the green arrow. And then we bring this over here as such. So I could actually, as you can see, just by doing the gizmo, I can get this thing into place pretty quickly. Now, again, I'm going to just use the, I do like using it. It works pretty well. I'm going to use the axis to axis. I'm going to click on my first axis. I'm going to click on my second axis. Zoom in so I can get it. There it is. And now it's there. It's just now I got to make sure that I'm on the, I got to bring this down a little bit. So I'm going to escape out. And I will bring this down a bit and a little higher. And that's that. This one is probably still a little, either this one's higher than it needs to be or this one's a little bit lower. But anyways, I can push that here a little bit. Actually, I'm freehanding it again. So let's make sure I'm grabbing that. There we go. This one might actually be a little bit lower than it needs to be on the board. So there it is. Okay. So with a little bit of finesse, you can get this thing pulled together. I mean, I was able to pull in a bunch of these things in, I think, about 7-8 minutes time here. So what are some of the other features that they've got here? Under tools, they have check collisions. Now, keep in mind that this is not going to be something that's going to look at the assembly and say, well, these two are supposed to connect or collide with each other, and therefore they shouldn't be flagged. They're just going to tell you where the collisions are. Okay? And this makes perfect sense because there really is a collision going on here. But in this case, that's perfectly fine. The only thing I've noticed is that, for example, sometimes it's not easy to show, because if it's already got a light gray to it, sometimes it's not easy to tell if this is actually in a collision situation or if it's not. And then, of course, this one probably is because it needs to be brought up a little bit. So you can see that there's a difference of the coloring that may kind of impede this. But nevertheless, you can see the collisions. What about seeing on the inside of this thing? Because that's another problem now, is that because of all these connectors and everything, if I want to see something that's going on, like there might be a collision in here, how can I see it? Well, one of the other features that they provided here was under the view toggle selection view, and this one's kind of cool. I'm gonna hit my blue here so that we can see this from a top-down point of view, and then I'm going to do a shift right mouse click so we can give this a little bit of an angle. And what it does is it allows us to kind of dissect this depending on the axis that we're on. So if I pull this one all the way through here and I do the one that's going down, I can literally slice this board in half and I can take a look at it. So you can have a lot of fun with it one way or another, so depending on how you want to set that up. And they do give you different ways of basically formulating these different planes depending on what you need to see. But the default one seems to do a pretty good job of things here. So, and of course, if you want to turn it off, you have to go back into the view toggle selection view here. Okay, so there it is, and now it is back to it here. Okay, so that's kind of the assembly capabilities here in a nutshell. I do have another polling question for you. I'd like to know if you found this particular capability useful. All right, so the polls are done. It's interesting. Okay, so a lot of people, if you had the opportunity to use this, you definitely make use of it. And a good portion of you are saying, yeah, this is actually something they would make use of. And I'm not surprised that there's still a percentage of people, especially if you're only doing one single board, if this would be a kind of an overkill for you. But yep, there it is. So it's kind of good to see that there is definitely an interest in this particular capability. So what I'd like to do now is I pretty much have given you an overview of it. I'm pretty sure you also have a lot of questions about it. But before I turn this over to Christopher Che, and so I have an opportunity to look at some questions, I have one more polling question for you. And basically just like to know that in general, is this something that you'd be interested in investigating further, or you're like, all right, that was cool, but I'll get to it when I need to, or now this is not something I'm gonna really play with. And this is talking about the multi-board in general. Wow, okay, so a strong percentage of you would either look into this further or definitely make use of it if you need to use it. That is pretty cool. All right, so again, you have a questions panel there. I've got to believe you do have some questions, and there may be a few things that I missed along the way, so I'll definitely be able to answer those for you here. So you guys have provided me a ton of questions. You're going to keep me busy for the next 24 hours over here. At this point in time, let's do the following. Since we are at the end of the hour, we are going to conclude this webinar for this month. Thank you so much for your time. We hope you found this to be useful, and we'll see you again next month.